4 months after the United States announced its plans to reshape the global economy, the consequences have started to show. The national debt has ballooned to a record $37 trillion. Factories in the Midwest that once built the backbone of the future now sit silent. Contracts worth billions have disappeared overnight. While these changes shake America, partners around the world are quietly shifting their business to Canada. Japanese utilities, German automakers, British defense firms, and others are no longer calling American suppliers. Instead, they are turning to Toronto, Vancouver, and other Canadian hubs. The question now is how much more ground America can lose before the damage becomes permanent. Brazil offers the first and clearest example of this shift. For over a century, Brazilian agriculture leaned heavily on American expertise. Vast soybean farms, endless cattle ranches, and sprawling coffee plantations all relied on U.S. technology. Precision equipment, irrigation systems, and advanced crop monitoring were the foundation of this partnership. But in the past 2 years, Brazil has begun to move away. Imports of Canadian agricultural technology have surged more than 70%, while contracts with American suppliers have dropped by nearly a quarter. The reason is simple. American companies remained focused on domestic markets and struggled with export restrictions. Their solutions could not meet the needs of Brazil's enormous operations. Canadian firms, on the other hand, embedded themselves directly into Brazilian farming. Engineers moved to Brazil, studied the climate, the scale, and the challenges of tropical agriculture, and then designed technology specifically for it. Now, not only are Brazilian farmers buying Canadian systems, but they are also funding research centers in Canada and investing in Canadian agricultural companies. What once flowed naturally between Brazil and America is now flowing north, leaving U.S. farm equipment makers and research institutions behind. Japan tells a similar story, but this time in energy. For 70 years, American supplies kept Japanese industry alive. From coal shipments to liquefied natural gas, the United States was a reliable partner, but that reliability began to falter. Delays, political disputes, and unpredictable regulations left Japanese companies scrambling. In a country where power plants and factories operate on razor-thin margins, even a small disruption risked massive blackouts. Canada seized the moment. Energy companies in British Columbia built export terminals and promised stable deliveries without the political drama. Japanese firms signed long-term contracts worth more than $23 billion in under 2 years. Beyond energy, Japan has tied its future in electric vehicles and renewable resources to Canada. Materials like lithium and cobalt, once sourced from American mines, now come from Canadian operations. Japanese automakers are building research hubs in Toronto and Vancouver, setting up partnerships that will last decades. U.S. suppliers in Texas and Louisiana are already feeling the loss as orders vanish. Germany's decision may be the most shocking. The European powerhouse rebuilt its economy after World War II with the help of American innovation. For decades, German factories relied on U.S. materials, chemicals, and technologies. But the instability of U.S. trade policies pushed German firms to look elsewhere. Canadian suppliers stepped in, offering predictability, transparent pricing, and dependable delivery. German automakers have already shifted nearly half of their component sourcing from the United States to Canada. Car giants like BMW and Volkswagen are now investing directly in Canadian manufacturing, transferring proprietary technologies, and opening research centers. German chemical companies that once sourced critical materials from Louisiana now buy them from Canadian plants. This isn't just trade, it's a long-term relocation of entire supply chains. For American manufacturing towns in Ohio, Michigan, and Louisiana, the loss of German contracts has meant layoffs, reduced production, and fading economic influence. Mexico, America's closest neighbor, has also started realigning. For 30 years, the United States and Mexico shared one of the most successful trade relationships in the world. Factories and supply chains were tightly connected, creating millions of jobs and billions in trade. But sudden tariffs, shifting border rules, and unpredictable labor policies disrupted this integration. Mexican manufacturers grew tired of planning production around American political cycles. Canadian suppliers offered something steadier, stable contracts and partnerships unaffected by constant political changes. Mexican imports from Canada jumped more than 50% in 1 year, while purchases from American suppliers dropped by almost 20%. Mexican automakers and aerospace companies now source precision machinery and advanced components from Ontario and British Columbia. instead of Texas and Michigan. Joint ventures are being built that link Mexican manufacturing skills with Canadian materials and logistics. Even Mexico's energy sector is shifting, with renewable projects being developed with Canadian partners. For American border towns in Texas and Arizona, this has meant less trade and fewer opportunities. India's turn toward Canada might be the most strategically damaging for the United States. As the world's largest democracy and one of the fastest-growing economies, India was seen as America's natural partner. Shared democratic values and complementary strengths should have made the relationship unbreakable. But American visa restrictions, complicated regulations, and cultural barriers pushed Indian companies away. Skilled professionals found it harder to work in the United States, while Canada opened its doors. With easier work permits and welcoming policies, Canada became the preferred destination for Indian talent. Technology hubs that once grew between Bangalore and Silicon Valley are now thriving between Mumbai and Toronto. Indian technology exports to Canada have soared by nearly 80%, while contracts with American companies have dropped by over 30%. Pharmaceutical companies, agricultural importers, and even universities are also shifting their focus to Canada. Indian students increasingly choose Canadian institutions over American ones, shaping a new generation of talent that strengthens Canadian innovation, while leaving U.S. universities behind. South Korea follows a similar pattern. Known for its innovation and precision, South Korea built its rise on American support. From technology to advanced manufacturing, U.S. suppliers played a central role in Korea's development. But now, Canadian companies are replacing those roles. In less than 2 years, South Korean firms have moved key technology partnerships northward. Canadian materials, research, and development centers are becoming part of South Korea's supply chain. As with Japan and Germany, the reason comes down to stability. South Korean firms cannot afford sudden policy changes or supply disruptions. Canada offers contracts that stretch decades, ensuring that South Korean technology companies can plan their futures without uncertainty. Even Britain, one of America's closest historical allies, has begun redirecting its defense and industrial contracts toward Canada. British defense firms, worried about the unpredictability of U.S. trade and regulation, have quietly shifted orders worth billions to Canadian partners. This includes aerospace components, security technologies, and even advanced research programs. While Britain may never fully abandon its ties to the United States, the fact that it is building new strategic supply lines with Canada shows how serious the global realignment has become. Each of these 7 countries, Brazil, Japan, Germany, Mexico, India, South Korea, and the United Kingdom, has chosen Canadian partners over American ones in areas that are vital to the future. Agriculture, energy, automobiles, technology, and defense are not just industries. They represent power, jobs, and influence. When these contracts leave America, they don't just hurt individual factories or companies. They weaken the United States' ability to shape global trade and politics. The human cost inside America is already being felt. In the Midwest, agricultural equipment factories are cutting jobs. In Texas and Louisiana, energy plants run at reduced capacity. Universities that once relied on international students are losing tuition and research money. Border towns that depended on trade with Mexico are seeing fewer trucks and less business. These are not temporary setbacks. They are signs of a deeper shift. What makes this moment so critical is that Canada is not just taking contracts, it is building permanent relationships. By embedding itself directly into supply chains, investing in joint research, and offering predictable partnerships, Canada is positioning itself as the stable alternative to the United States. And once those systems are built, they are not easily undone. For decades, America was the unquestioned leader in global trade. Partners around the world accepted its influence because it offered unmatched innovation, reliability, and opportunity. But now, instability at home and unpredictable policies have driven allies to look elsewhere. Canada, once seen as the quiet neighbor, has stepped into the gap, and with 7 major trade partners already making the switch, the trend is becoming harder to reverse. The United States has not lost all its leverage, but the cracks are spreading. If the shift continues, the cost will not only be measured in dollars, but also in power, influence, and long-term security. The question is not just how much America has already lost, but how much more it can afford to lose before the damage becomes irreversible. The situation grows more serious when looking at the wider global picture. Trade is not just about goods moving from one country to another. It is about trust, long-term planning, and who nations want to depend on in times of crisis. The fact that so many countries are now relying on Canada shows a loss of faith in America's ability to provide that stability. It also signals a reshaping of alliances that were once thought to be permanent. Consider what this means in the years ahead. If Brazil continues to funnel its agricultural research into Canada, Canadian companies could soon become global leaders in farming technology. If Japan and South Korea continue building their electric vehicle and energy supply chains around Canada, North America's future industrial heart might beat in Toronto or Vancouver rather than Detroit or Houston. If India keeps sending its brightest minds and top investments to Canada, the next wave of global innovation may not come from Silicon Valley, but from Canadian cities. The loss of these partnerships is not just economic. It reshapes how countries view America's role in the world. Once seen as the essential partner, the United States now risks being replaced by its northern neighbor in some of the most critical sectors of the global economy.